It was the seat of power of Excalibur for so long. It seems right to set up a gate there. And it might be the way to save Brian. I'll see what can be done. Today on the Comic Book Report, we're back in the Dawn of X with Excalibur Volume 1 Hardcover. Stick around and check it out. Greetings all, my name is Dominic and welcome to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. Today we're tackling the first 12 issues of Tini Howard's Excalibur run. This is during the Dawn of X era for the X-Men books, and I can't wait to dive in today. But before we do, a few quick facts about today's collection. Excalibur was written by Tini Howard and illustrated primarily by Marcus II. The issues collected in this volume were first published by Marvel Comics beginning in 2019. The volume itself collects Excalibur issues 1 through 12, and finally this oversized hardcover comes in at 336 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through today's collection as well as commenting on plot points. You've been advised. Okay, and here's the collection itself. This is Excalibur Volume 1, the hardcover collection. If you don't know, this is part of the Dawn of X oversized hardcover collections. I've taken a look at a few of these between my haul video and my review of the Marauders hardcover collection a few weeks ago. And overall, formatting-wise, this is really similar to a lot of them. As you can see, this collection favors green, but still uses that minimalist kind of approach. And then under the dust jacket, it's gonna, instead of having a symbol, it has the word Excalibur stylized, which is an interesting choice, but it establishes a nice kind of continuity with these volumes. I'll give you a better look at the dust jacket real quick, and then I'll go ahead and show you what I mean. It prints the word Excalibur. Like I said, it uses the series title font there across the under the dust jacket art. Still looking very sleek. Love these editions. Very fun to see that on my bookcase. I'll go ahead and spread the volume open so you can get the full picture of what I'm talking about. And yeah, overall, I really like the simple colors and minimalist aesthetic on these volumes. There's a sense of consistency, even if the colors vary widely, but it's still very fun. Next, I'll go ahead and open it up and give you an idea of the binding itself. Not the best binding in the entire world, but overall, pretty minimal gutter loss overall. It's not as good as some of the omnibus volumes I've seen as far as the binding, but serviceable. Okay, and with all the exterior matter out of the way, it's finally time to jump into the collection proper. And where do I even begin with Excalibur? Maybe I'll start personally. So of all the Dawn of X era titles after reading House of X, Powers of 10, I was looking at, after the X-Men title series itself, Excalibur was the next one that immediately drew my eye. It was described as basically X-Men meets medieval sword and sorcery. And that blending of genre and kind of motif definitely intrigued me, and I started to look into more of what this series was about. I, of course, also came across the series from the 1980s that Chris Claremont started as the X-Men spin-off book, also titled Excalibur. That team was headed by Captain Britain, Megan, we have the Phoenix, as well as Kitty Pryde and Nightcrawler in that first team. And I actually bought the first couple omnibuses of that run as well and started reading that. And I'm actually happy I read that even before this came out, because this series actually pays homage to some of those characters and that initial run. That run also dealt with the Otherworld, which is where a lot of this fantastic medieval sword and sorcery era storytelling takes place. We also see Saturni and the Werewolves and so many other characters and plot elements that we see in this volume itself. So there is some fun continuity between that initial 80s run and this current Excalibur run, which I think if you hadn't read the basis for this, you wouldn't exactly be alienated reading this, but I think it was a good bridge for me to kind of get a sense of what the tone could be and kind of some of the elements I'd see in this X book. As far as the plotline itself, we have the formation of the new Excalibur team, which includes Betsy Braddock as the new Captain Britain, alongside Rogue and Gambit and Richter and Jubilee, and of course Apocalypse, which is maybe the most controversial member of this team. And a lot of their adventures have to do with the bridge into Otherworld and some of the shenanigans that go on there with Saturni and the rest. Beyond that, it reads kind of like a typical X-Men book. Like I said, you get kind of a zany, fantastical tone and some fantasy settings. So for people that are looking more for grounded, realistic, more so storytelling, this is probably not the title to pick up for you. If you like swords and sorcery era fantasy, this is a fun book, a fun like twist on a typical X-Men formula. I don't think it has some of the charm I've seen in the 80s run. However, a lot of the modern touches, modern art styles is definitely a breath of fresh air to read today. And if you're reading a lot of the Dawn of X era books, I think that this really helps diversify that lot by feeling very different than the other titles on the shelves. As far as the art goes, it's very consistent throughout. It has a more cartoony style. It looks very polished, but it's a beautiful art style for what it is. If you don't mind the more cartoony kind of graphic style, it's very beautiful. The color palette is extraordinarily vibrant and vivid, and that to me is one of the most memorable pieces of this book, is some of that vibrant art. Before this, I wasn't overly familiar with Marcus II, one of the pencilers on this book, but afterwards, I'm definitely going to be paying closer attention because it is a very fun art style. As far as the storylines that are included in this volume, I would say there's maybe 2 or 3 kind of mini story arcs and a couple other little smatterings of things here and there. We have the reintroduction of the War Wolves, which is fun. We have all these shenanigans with Saturni, as well as the Braddock siblings, which is really fascinating. But overall, I do feel like the storylines were a bit inconsistent. It can feel a bit jumbled or jarring if you're reading this issues 1 through 12, as I have. I imagine if you were reading Dawn of X like one issue of a time across all these series, I think it almost would read maybe better. Reading it back to back to back, you do lose a sense of continuity between some of the issues, I feel like, maybe a little bit. Still an excellent collection, but maybe not the most cohesive entry in the Dawn of X titles. One thing I personally wanted to address or note is this idea that this is the most foundational entry you need before reading X of Swords, the big crossover Dawn of X era event. I heard a lot of people say this was essential reading before reading X of Swords, and I kind of see what they're talking about. X of Swords really has to do with a lot of the Otherworld stuff, as well as the character of Saturni, who is like the big bad kind of orchestrator of the X of Swords event. So to that end, yes, this is a good read leading into X of Swords. However, it wasn't as critical as I feel like people made it sound to me. I think a quick Google search, or even just jumping into X of Swords after reading House of X, Powers of 10, you wouldn't be that lost. Like I said, if you know who the character of Saturni is, if you're loosely familiar with the idea of Otherworld, and you're reading some of the X-Men title, I think you could probably skip a lot of this volume. The biggest foundation for X of Swords in this is, again, what Otherworld is and who Saturni is. Once you know that, the rest of this is more or less non-essential for X of Swords, at least in my opinion. Overall, this book had some great characters. I think Betsy Braddock and maybe Jubilee and Apocalypse were some of the better realized versions. Gambit and Rogue were fun, but I don't feel like they really delved into a lot of what was going on there. Same with some of the other characters. But overall, a fun read. I wouldn't consider this a classic. I think the stories are quirky and fun. I'm super happy I read them, and I'm happy I have this in my collection. But I would not consider this an instant classic or a must-read. Again, with a lot of these Dawn of X era hardcover books, I almost love the format more than the content itself with some of the books. I think that's definitely true with the Excalibur run here. It's enough that I'm considering getting the Volume 2 when it comes out. I know that this one, I believe, might actually already even be out of print. You can still find it in trades or digital or single issue, of course. But these editions kind of are going quick. And it's a fun edition, but unless that fantasy kind of genre speaks to you, or some of the main characters, this might be a skip for many of you. And as we close out the collection today on that cover art gallery, which is such a fun feature, especially with all the green still honored throughout, that kind of fits the uniform of the book, so to speak, just a great way to close out the collection. And now I think it's time to give this Excalibur hardcover a grade. For its fun, almost cartoony art style, A memorable, eclectic team of mutants, and its ties to the 80s series, The Comic Book Report gives Excalibur by Tini Howard, hardcover Volume 1, a B-. I would not say this is an instant classic or really required reading for much of anything, but if this is your flavor, it's a fun read. And that's going to do it for The Comic Book Report. Thank you so much for watching. Go ahead and leave a like and a comment, and until next time, have a good one.